You ready to go? I'm Richie Wilson from Soul Seafood and Grill. I want to show you how to make the original This is a wonderful dish using some very simple ingredients. And to get us started, all we need to do is chop a shallot. There's a lot of talk about exactly what an Oysters Rockefeller should be or shouldn't be, and the truth is that nobody really knows. I think typically we would all agree that it is a little bit of spinach, an oyster obviously, a little bit of shallot, hollandaise sauce to finish the whole lot off, and then grilled. But the truth is, we don't know 100% exactly what went into the original dish. So this is our best guess. So into this pot, I'm going to put a little bit of shallot, a little white wine vinegar, and a little thyme. And we're just going to reduce that slightly, and that's to start our base with the hollandaise. Into this pot, I'm going to cook my spinach. So a little glug of olive oil, just to raise the cooking temperature of the butter a little bit. And then just 1 or 2 knobs of butter. Before the pan gets too hot, we're going to put in our shallots because we want to gently sweat them down. So a low to moderate heat and start to bring out the sweetness that's in them. Once the shallots have softened a little bit, we're going to put in our washed baby spinach. Now, baby spinach is far better than big spinach. A big spinach has got a big vein running through it. It's quite chewy. It's got a big bite to it. But the baby spinach is going to wilt down very quickly for us in this butter, and it'll be very tender at the bottom of those oysters when we're finished. So just like that, our reduction is ready. So I'm just turn off the heat on that. And just as quickly as well, our spinach is wilted. Perfect, we'll leave that. Now, hollandaise is the next most important thing. So into a bowl, 1 egg yolk, and then we're going to put in as much of this reduction as we can. So that's just going to set up our egg yolk to make our emulsification that's then going to hold our butter. So let's move over our little water bath. So over a nice rolling steam, we're going to add our egg yolks in the bowl over it. It's nicely sealed and nicely settled on top of the pot, and we can start to work with this. So oysters are one of those things that people either love or hate. And I think that Oysters Rockefeller is a great way to start eating oysters because the oyster itself is cooked through. So it kind of gets you past that little bit of texture issue that a lot of people have with an oyster. Okay, so now we can see our eggs are just starting to cook out. It's just starting to stick to the sides there, and they've doubled in volume. So they're now starting to show the whisk just barely holding the figure of 8 across the top of the eggs. And now we can start to add our butter. So we have our butter here that we've melted and allowed to settle in here. So our milk solids have fallen to the bottom, and then the butter fats are at the top, and this is what we would call clarified. And you need to take care not to add these milk solids because that will split out the hollandaise on us. Okay, so a little at a time. Constantly whisking while you're adding the butter. Don't stop or the bottom will cook out. And we're after the consistency of sort of a very light mayonnaise. And then if you notice, just like now, that the eggs are starting to overcook a little bit on the edge of that water, just take it off the heat and we can finish it off here. And we can see now just on the edge of the hollandaise that the butter is just starting to settle a little bit around the edges and not really mixing in too well to our hollandaise. So it's either had enough butter at this stage, or we could add a little warm water to this to thin it down a little bit so that we can keep going. But this is the sort of texture that I really like for Oysters Rockefeller because we don't want the hollandaise to run straight off the oyster before it's cooked. So this is about right, and we'll set it to one side. So obviously, the most important ingredient in Oysters Rockefeller is the oyster itself. A little bit tricky to open, but once you get the hang of it, it should be very quick and simple. The oyster itself has a small little hinge just at the back here underneath this first little opening. And what we're trying to do is get the point of the oyster knife into the hinge. We hear that little pop, A little twist of the knife and the oyster's open. And the rest of it should be just running the oyster knife down the back of the shell, just to make sure that we don't leave any of the oyster behind us. So it should be clean on the shell. And then we take the oyster itself and just free it from the bottom of that shell. There's another little muscle underneath there that we just want to get underneath. And then if we check ourselves, we can just turn the oyster over so we know now that the oyster is free from its shell. So for Rockefeller, these are very slightly poached oysters. So I'm going to put them, juice and all, into a dry pot, about 6 for Oysters Rockefeller. Half dozen oysters is normal. And it's going to be very quick. So while that's happening, we're going to take our tray that's going to put the oysters underneath the grill to glaze. So what we want to do is just sort of try and balance our shells so that they're not going to fall over on us. We can balance them against each other as we go along. And then that way they'll stay reasonably straight for us when we put them under the grill. So a little bit of spinach in each shell. Perfect. And the oysters are already cooked. We can see they're just starting to firm up. They're just curling into themselves. And we don't want to go any further, otherwise the oyster will become really hard and chewy. So we just pick out those oysters and put them back into the shells. I would try and face them the right way around. Presentation is everything. Perfect. And we're just going to spoon over a nice dollop of hollandaise over each oyster. And then we can either blowtorch these and really crisp up our hollandaise. But the best thing is to put it under a really hot grill. Then the hollandaise itself should melt slightly as it's browning, and then also heat up the shell from the oyster itself and make sure everything's good and hot when we're serving it. So let's pop these under the grill. And these are absolutely perfect. Oysters Rockefeller, just mind the shells a little bit hot. On the plate, I just have a little bed of sea salt that'll just keep them all up nice and straight. I can smell the butter. This is one of the all-time greats, Oysters Rockefeller. I have to eat one actually, I think. That is so good. That's absolutely delicious.